back, everybody, to the 2021 Asia Society Arts and Museums Summit. But we're really thrilled to kick off the summit's first panel discussion, Decolonizing Curatorial Practices. This panel will be moderated by Joselina Cruz, who's director and curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design from the De La Salle College of Saint Benit in Manila. So to accompany Joselina, we'll have three panelists, Jacqueline Chao, Chia-Wei Hsu, and Sara Raza, who will each give a 10-minute PowerPoint presentation, followed by a 45-minute discussion with Joselina, after which we'll have an opportunity for about 10 minutes of question and answers session from the audience. So again, as we did with the keynote, please submit any questions via the Q&A tab at any point during the presentation or the discussion. So it's my pleasure to first introduce Jacqueline Chao, who's the Senior Curator of Asian Art from the Crow Museum of Asian Art in Dallas, to give the first presentation. Jacqueline, please go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, for such a kind introduction. Before I begin, I just wish to express my thanks to you and also to Sarah McCaffrey and the team at Asia Society New York. Also to my fellow panelists, thank you so much for inviting me here to be part of this important panel and be part of this year's Arts and Museums Summit. So my name is Jacqueline Chao, and I serve as the Senior Curator of Asian Art at the Crow Museum of Asian Art of the University of Texas at Dallas. The museum inspires and promotes learning and dialogue about the arts and cultures of Asia through its exhibitions, the research and preservation of its collections, programming, and visitor experience and engagement. It is free and located in the heart of the Arts District in downtown Dallas. The museum is also recognized as the Asian Art Museum of Dallas and is only one of a handful of nonprofit art museums in the United States dedicated exclusively to showcasing the arts of Asia from ancient to contemporary times. Decolonizing curatorial practice can take on many forms, including developing more thematic exhibitions that emphasize connections between cultures, spotlighting the artistic excellence of lesser known and underrepresented artists, and partnering more closely with our communities. This presentation will focus on some of my current and recently curated contemporary Asian art exhibition projects and programs at the museum that have aspired to position works by contemporary artists of Asian descent in expanded art historical, theoretical, and philosophical frameworks, with particular emphasis on expanding the profile of contemporary female artists of Asian descent, as well as developing new community collaborations. It is well documented that women, especially women of color, are underrepresented in the arts. This year, we continued the work of showcasing the excellence of Asian female artists with the exhibition Born of Fire, Contemporary Japanese Women Ceramic Artists, dedicated to featuring the work of living, emerging, and established contemporary Japanese women ceramic artists exclusively. Pioneering new technical and innovations in the medium, these remarkable artists are breaking barriers and forging new ways of creating and thinking about ceramics that reflect changes occurring in contemporary Japanese art and society. The works express the influence of nature, innovations in ceramic making techniques, and practices. Slide here. Okay. In 2020, our museum launched a focused multi-year exhibition series dedicated to making visible the work of Texas-based contemporary Asian women artists. Each of the artists presented in this program focused on contemporary issues both in Texas and abroad, giving voice to complex humanized stories of identity, place, tradition, and modernity. Born in Jilin, China, Austin-based Bailey Liu is a visual artist who creates material and process-driven, site-responsive installations. Working with commonplace materials and elements such as thread, scissors, paper, stone, Liu manipulates their intrinsic qualities to extrapolate complex cultural narratives and the trauma associated with migration and diaspora. For her first major exhibition in Dallas, and as the inaugural artist of the series, Liu created two site-responsive installations, Lore and Each and Every, in two of the museum's galleries that together touch on the theme of human connection. Lore, as you see here on the left, borrowed from the ancient Chinese legend of the red thread, which tells that when children are born, invisible red threads connect them to their soulmates. Over the years of their lives, they become closer and eventually find each other, overcoming great social divides or physical distances. The installation made use of thousands of hand-coiled discs of red thread, each pierced at the center by a single sewing needle, enabling its suspension from the ceiling. A disc may be connected to another or as a pair, and a pair of discs is made from a single thread. At the Crow Museum, this installation was designed to thematically and visually connect intentionally with Liu's second on-site installation, Each and Every, which is on the right. Each and Every was also a large-scale site-responsive installation and performance project consisting of hundreds of articles of children's clothing that have been preserved and quieted by industrial cement. And above the expanse of clothing, hundreds of lines of cement-dipped thread hung in an organic sequence, occupying the vertical space between floor and ceiling. In relationship to the piece, the artist was originally scheduled to perform silent sewing of ripped and torn children's clothing within the gallery, and community members were also invited to join and silently knit or sew with her. And as an artist, new mother, and immigrant, Liu's installation and corresponding performance piece was conceptualized in response to the migrant children crisis and the separation of migrant children from their parents at the southern border of the United States. In contrast to Lure, while appearing to connect and hold up the clothing, the threads did not actually touch the expanses of the clothing. Throughout her career as a visual artist, Liu has been formed by cross-cultural experiences, navigating two cultural systems, first as a child growing up in post-Mao China, then an international student, and later as a female artist of color in the United States. Her personal journey has helped to shape her work, fueling her ongoing desire to explore the lived experiences of those who navigate on the margin. Now more than ever in her work, the personal collides and converges with the political. Topics of diaspora, assimilation, survival, and the ultimate question of otherness versus our shared need for belonging are at the core of her research and creative process. Next slide, please. There we are. Furthering the intentions of the work and the artist, we partnered with MAP, or Make Art with Purpose, a nonprofit platform that works with artists, designers, architects, to produce creative projects that foster equity and inclusion and address social and environmental concerns throughout the world. In 2020, MAP commemorated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment in the United States Constitution that gave women the right to vote by commissioning local and national female artists to design flags to be installed throughout Dallas-Fort Worth that honored a woman who has had an impact upon their lives and or broader culture and society, or explored themes connected to the 19th Amendment. In partnership with MAP, the museum was one of the sites for the display of one of these flags in the downtown arts district. Bailey's design flag outline, which was also on display during her exhibition, presented an image of absence. The lines of the Santa-type image was imprinted using contour lines of seams, hems, collars, and cuffs of used children's clothing in protest of the separated and displaced migrant children at our southern border and in honor of those anonymous mothers who are still awaiting their children's return. And originally planned for March 2020, we rescheduled Leo's Public Artist Talk to a virtual format due to the pandemic and expanded the original program in partnership with the School of Economic, Political, and Policy Sciences of the University of Texas at Dallas and with Refugee Services Texas to feature additional presentations by human rights scholars and specialists regarding the ongoing migrant crisis. Next slide, please. Sorry if, okay, I can see it now. So this year we continued our Texas-based Asian Women Artists series with another focus exhibition, Divine Spark, highlighting the works of Tokyo-born, Dallas-based artist Kana Harada. This exhibition, which features new works created by the artist during this time of the global pandemic, blend messages of hope and positivity, consisting largely of multimedia sculptures with striking painted details, intricate paper-cut installations, and vibrant acrylic and watercolor paintings. Throughout the exhibition, handmade sculptures composed mainly of black foam sheets, such as New World, which you see pictured posed with the artist, incorporate real wood and reminiscent of natural vegetation as they overflow with seeds and flowering fruit, and create a sense of being outside while inside. And the artist's 2D works, including her painted folding screens, such as Welcome to My Forest, as seen here, are serving as gateways into her universe. And through these windows of time and space, we receive glimpses of worlds of infinite imagination, possibility, and positivity. Harada invited viewers to engage with her work by using the galleries as a space of contemplation and renewal. You could sit beneath any of her pieces to discover intimate painted details and hidden markings. I'm pleased to share actually that if any of you happen to be in Houston this season, the exhibition was selected for travel to Asia Society Texas Center in Houston, and it's currently on view there until early January. Next slide, please. And let's see. Okay. And just finally, I wanted to share one more program. During the time of the global pandemic, there has been an even larger, clear concern that was affecting our North Texas Asian communities, but also many of the Asian diasporic communities throughout the US during this time. With the rise of the pandemic came also an increased rise in anti-Asian hate. Working in collaboration with Vivian Lee, curator of contemporary art at the Dallas Museum of Art, we gathered quickly to address this issue and created a free online program and panel conversation via the museum's Facebook page about the critical role played by artists, art historians, and museums in addressing racism against people of Asian descent and the importance of community building during this time of the pandemic, called Art and Activism in Our Time of Crisis. Speakers included art historian Michelle C. Wong, a Chinese and Buddhist art specialist who critiqued the misappropriation of an 18th century Chinese textile on the cover of the CDC's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal, and artist Kenneth Tam, who initiated at the beginning of the pandemic the open source spreadsheet We Are Not COVID to document the rapid escalation of anti-Asian incidents. We were inspired by our colleagues, fellow art workers, artists, art historians who are working outside of their own professional capacities perhaps, but who are also finding ways to bring about social change. And while it reflects a moment in time last year, sadly this topic continues to remain timely and relevant. The program will exist and be available for free for as long as possible on our museum's Facebook page. It has received over 2,500 views, and as well has received an Association of Art Museum Curators 2021 Award of Excellence, which will hopefully help to further broaden exposure of this conversation. And so in conclusion, it has been a joy to be with you all here today, and I hope that my very brief talk has inspired thinking about the ways in which we as arts and cultural workers, arts enthusiasts, and museum professionals can play a major role in shaping the direction of how the American public understands and engages with Asian art in the years to come. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chia-Wei Hsu, and I'm an artist. And this time, first, I would like to thank Asia Society for inviting me to attend this forum. It's an honor to be able to present alongside with Jacqueline, and Sarah. And in this forum, I would like to talk about a few concepts from the Asia Art Biennial, which I co-curated with artist Ho Zunian in 2019, to discuss possible practice when post-colonial issues encounter the context of digital technology, new materialism, or the Anthropocene. And please show the first slide. I would like to start with one of Ho Zunian's work. What you see on the slide now is the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia. This work inspired me to think about database narrative, while some other concepts from this work were also used in the Asia Art Biennial. Let me briefly introduce what this work is about. It's an online project, so after the meeting, you can direct search the title to view the work online. And since 2016, Ho Zunian built an online platform with engineers about the controversial concept of Southeast Asia. Ho Zunian chose different words. They begin with the 26 letters of the alphabet. This word may be concept, subject, or people. Then they collect a lot of video and audio material from the internet. The platform's editing system will automatically edit the vocabulary and material into the real-time videos. And instead of using linear narrative, which is often used in cinema, I think this kind of database method can liberate the existing ideological framework. What does this mean? If we look at the concept of Southeast Asia, it's actually very fragmented and vague. Especially in Southeast Asia, the region already has very complex language, religion, and ethnic groups, and later went through colonialism and different colonial regimes, then divide the area again. Although after World War II, it seemed to be a temporary end of colonial era, then different nation-states appeared, but they were quickly involved in the Cold War. So the entire region has a complex history. In this work, Ho Zhu-Nian used keywords to explore the concept of Southeast Asia, since each word may not only be about a nation-state or a period in colonial history. It's a bit similar to how everything is connected on the internet. One concept can be continuously linked to other concepts, therefore breaking the existing interpretational framework. And I've adopted this kind of a hyperlink method in my work and curatorial practice in recent years. I invite Ho Zhu-Nian to co-curate the Asia Art Biennial with me at that time, and we further developed this concept and method. In Ho Zhu-Nian's work, for the letter A, he mentioned the concept of altitude, attitude, and anarchism, and used Zomia and Sulu Sea as example. These two areas are also central to the discourse of the Asia Art Biennial. So you can see on this. Next slide. As you can see from this slide, there are two maps. The one on the left is Zomia, and the one on the right is Sulu Sea. We can first look at Zomia. The concept was developed by the anthropologist James Gold, and it's been discussed more and more frequently. It's common in many discourses today, and it's referred to the highlands that are over 300 meters in Southeast Asia. The area overlaps several countries, including many parts of Southeast Asia, such as Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. It's also overlaps parts of China and India. And the core concept is to know that in the past, it has already been a region that surrounding lowland states and agricultural countries cannot control. Even in modern times, people escape from their countries still take refuge in Zomia. So through this concept, we can see that there is an opposition between highland anarchism and lowland area. It's not only about altitude, but also about attitude. And then if we look at the Sulu Sea on the right, the area can also be seen as a marine version of Zomia. The area is bordered by three countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. This makes it difficult to control the area. Over the past 10 years, there have been a lot of news reports related to the Sulu Sea, mainly because of the activities of jihadists or terrorists. And this organization have kidnapped tourists in vacation sites, where piracy is also a serious issue. And in fact, when we study the history of the Sulu Sea, the area was notorious for slave piracy and jihad, even during the colonial era. And then if we look at Zomia and Sulu Sea, it's like an axis between high and low altitude, and in between is the ideology of lowland states, pulling in two opposite directions. From the example of Sulu Sea, we can see the relationship between the ocean and land from the larger perspective. Please show next slide. Yeah. From this slide is about the tale of the bamboo spaceship by Singaporean artist Ming Wang. And we can take a closer look at the relationship between the ocean and the land in his work. For traditional agricultural national narrative often start from the center of the continent, while oceans are often outside the mainstream narrative. In the South China Sea, piracy exists for hundreds of years. There are many reasons for this. Many of these pirates were actually once farmers who failed in farming and went bankrupt. In addition, since the Ming Dynasty banned maritime trade in the 14th century, the people who used to survive by sea trade were forced to trade illegally, resulting in piracy that continued for hundreds of years in this region. And we can see this as a sea-based force against the land regimes. And so the main subject of Ming Wang's work is the Peking Opera class Rainbow, which toured Southeast Asia in the late Ming Dynasty and early Qing Dynasty. It's about how the monk of Shaolin Temple joined the Rainbow and toured all over Southeast Asia in order to escape the oppression of the empire. At the time, Peking opera and martial art often carried anti-Qing dynasty ideology and were toured against the empire, and the sea was their base. Ming Wang's work proposed the concept of be water, which developed from Bruce Lee Kung Fu, as well as the strategy of the Hong Kong social movement at that time. It means to flow like water in all directions, to exist but be indestructible. And next slide. Yeah, thank you. So from this slide, we can see the diagram on this slide is developed from the Zomia and Sulu Sea axis that was just mentioned. And we can see that the other axis is cloud and mineral. This axis is related to our current technology development. And today, the cloud is not only a real cloud floating in the sky, but also a digital cloud. And digital technology today is no longer just a purely virtual world. In fact, there is a lot of material support behind it, such as a rare mine. And nowadays, there are many rare mines in mobile phone or computers, especially in Zomia in Myanmar. The area is currently the fourth largest producer of rare mineral in the world. We can see that the minerals underground and the cloud in the sky form another axis. So now we have a line between the mountain and sea, and then a line between the cloud and mineral. We can take a closer look at the intersection of in the middle. For example, there is a water cycle between the cloud and the Sulu Sea, which change rapidly. And then we can see the relationship between Zomia and mineral, which is related to plate movement. After millions of years, plates are formed from the mineral, and plate movement form high mountain. This is a long process that goes beyond human time and space. And the framework of history called ideology and national narrative and so on move along the mountain and the sea axis, while the framework of anthropocentrism or human limitation move along the cloud and mineral axis. At this point, it may still be difficult to understand this diagram, and I would like to further use the work of Chinese artist Liu Chuang to show that the concept of this diagram are not just symbolic, but are actually at work. So please show next slide. The next slide is Liu Chuang's work, Bitcoin mining and field recording of ethnic minorities. This work was shot in the region in Zhongmia, located in a minority territory in the southern part of Sichuan, China. He noticed that there are now many Bitcoin mines in the minority territories. This because the area has a lot of rainfall in the summer and the electricity generated by water power is cheaper. So there are many Bitcoin mines in this area. We can see the actual water cycle of the diagram in this work. The seawater evaporates, form into cloud, and then it rains in the Zhongmia region. The water generates power for the Bitcoin mining farm, and then evaporates into the digital cloud. And furthermore, we can also see two axes operating in this work. The first is about the history of local minorities fighting against the empire, and the other is produced by modern technology. For example, Bitcoin is a kind of a currency that is independent from national financial system. And then finally, please show next slide. Yeah. So now we return to the diagram in this last slide. I would like to take Liu Chuang's work as an example. We can see that the ethnographic and anthropological issue is related to the mountain and sea axis, while the issue of modern technology and non-human are related to the cloud and mineral axis. The two axes meet and become a cross, and also form relationship with each other. I think this is a possible way to deal with the issue of colonialism today, which is to face the complex issue in a contemporary context, such as from a technological or non-human perspective. And then if we look at the center of this diagram now, if the original central subject, which may be anthropocentrism or national ideology, is now torn apart and broken into pieces, then what will be in the center? Our idea for planning the biennial at that time was that the center would not be replaced with another answer. There would only be nothingness, which is similar to the concept of nothingness in Japanese philosophy of the Kyoto school. Nothingness is not a kind absence. It's an empty space, and where we can create endless possibilities. It's like a stage when various existing interpretational frameworks are loosened. A stage is empty in the middle, and then we can think or practice in the middle. And this is the end of my presentation. And if you have any question, we can discuss in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chia-Wei. I really appreciate that and look forward to circling back to some of your ideas in the discussion. So the final panelist is Sara Raza, who is a Red Burns Fellow at NYU, New York University, and Punk Orientalism Studio. So Sara, thank you so much. Please, we'd love to hear your presentation next. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody from New York. Thank you very much to Michelle Yun Mapplethorpe and her team for this wonderful invitation, and to my esteemed panelists and other members of the summit. It's a great pleasure to join you all this morning. Michelle introduced me in the capacity of my current work as a fellow and running my own curatorial studio. But today I'll be presenting with my former hat on as the Guggenheim UBS MAP, Global Art Initiative Curator for North Africa and Middle East, which I was invited for to be part of in 2015 as the third and final curator of this initiative. To focus on the said region of Middle East and North Africa, and to really think about diversifying the collection. So not only was it a curatorial exercise in decolonization, if you like, but it was also a collection building exercise. So it's a double formation there. So that was really the thinking behind the exhibition, But a Storm Was Blowing from Paradise, that I'll be speaking about today. And as I had mentioned earlier in the title of this presentation, that contraband plays a sort of important role as a decolonizing strategy when thinking about curatorial practices. And that's something that I want to take out of its illicit connotation, remove it from anything illicit, and think about contraband or smuggling as a tool for rethinking the ways in which we think about curatorial practices and exhibition making. So with that in mind, I want to speak through some of the ideas within this formation of this exhibition, this strategy, and what I was trying to achieve in building the collection, but also bringing forward my own curatorial scholarship. As I was generally thinking about works that already resided in the Guggenheim's collection, its US holdings, and to sort of think through some of the thematics. So one of the main principles of collecting at the Solomon R. Guggenheim is art of our time, non-objective painting, and art of abstraction. And I decided to focus on art of our time in thinking about my project in general. And so what we see here are some exhibition views. And I wanted to sort of follow this approach that was non-didactic, was more pragmatic. I have an artist-driven curatorial practice, and by that it means that I work with living contemporary artists. And I've been fortunate to have worked with a number of them over a long period, extended period, 15 years of my practice. So that was something that I wanted to really focus on, the art of our time, and sort of bring forward that ideology. And building a collection is very different from mounting a curatorial exhibition. You know, it's a very different analysis that goes into that, because you're thinking about longevity, you're thinking about legacy, you're also thinking about art history. And you're not thinking about art history in the more horizontal formation like we do in the West. You know, it's a very clear trajectory of what constitutes as modern and postmodern in the Western art historical frame. But when we're thinking about collecting and curatorial practices from non-Western art, we're thinking both of a vertical and a horizontal model. And that was something that I wanted to really sort of bring forward within this project. So I had sort of 5 cross-circulating themes that interlaced: geometries, histories, migrations, origins, and contraband, which I had mentioned earlier. So those were sort of my guiding principle. And geometry was a very important sort of guiding thematic for this entire exhibition, because it was sort of rooted in mathematics, a branch of the thinking sciences related to logic, related to truth, ideas around ethics. And so that was really sort of central to my project. And I was thinking a lot about the work of Edmund Husserl, who was a German Jewish mathematician in the early 20th century. He was writing about the crisis in modern sciences at a time when fascism was on the rise in Europe, particularly in the case of Nazi fascism spreading from Germany onwards. And so that was really the sort of principle that I was thinking. He was arguing for something that we had to go back to sort of locate the origin of meaning, go back to truth that is located in geometry. And as we know, geometry was founded in the Middle East and North African region. It is very much associated with ideas around the thinking sciences, truth, logic, and so forth. And then it comes back to the idea of ethics. So that was really the main critical impulse in thinking about work. And what you see here on view are works that I had selected that not only sort of created a confluence with the Solomon R. Guggenheim's building, but also when it traveled to Milan, the exhibition at the Gallery d'Arte Moderna, how the shift in site specificity also changed. And as I mentioned, one of the key themes was migration and thinking about the exhibition. and sort of migratory patterns. At the time of thinking about this exhibition, coming back to the art of our time, I'm also thinking about the history of our time. We were sort of going through one of the worst migratory crises since the Second World War, the Syrian crisis, which had reached obviously parliamentary level both in Europe, and how that was being sort of mirrored in the United States with its own issues that were sort of taking place here. So although I was working within a particular geographical framework of the Middle East and North Africa, I was also thinking about the parallels. You know, when I arrived in the United States in 2015, it was a year prior to the election. So there were all these discussions about migrancy going on here in the United States as well. It wasn't that it was an issue going on somewhere in the Middle East and it's impacting Europe. It was very much present in the US. And so when we think about decolonizing curatorial practice, you know, we should sort of think about dissolving this them and us barrier, local, global, and also think about this third space, which is now the digital. And if we could, you know, sort of rethink these different spaces. And Vanessa, could we kindly stay on this slide, please? Because I'd like to make a point here. So my exhibition's title is But a Storm is Blowing from Paradise. And those of you that are familiar with the writing of Walter Benjamin, as prolific philosopher and writer, part of the Frankfurt School group. It was taken from his last ever essay, thesis on philosophy, before he deceased. And he had a very interesting sort of demise, if you like. And it was unfortunate also that he was trying to escape Nazi-occupied France, where he was located, to come to the United States. He had a visa to come to the US. Unfortunately, when he was trying to go through neutral Portugal, he was told that everybody's visas would be revoked, that he'd be sent back. So he subsequently committed suicide. And in his possession, he had a Paul Klee painting of an angel, and its wings are clipped. And it's the angel that he writes about in this last essay. And he says the angel is being, you know, torn between debris and trying to save the world, and there is a storm blowing from paradise. So that's where the sort of title came from for the exhibition. That was then also the same title given to a series of paintings by Iranian artist Rokhni Harizadeh, which you see on this slide at the bottom. On the top, you see an artwork by Israeli-British artist Ori Gersht, which traced the last journey of Walter Benjamin through the Pyrenees Mountains and how he's trying to go on to neutral Portugal. And so you have this third protagonist, which is the landscape. On the bottom is a work by Rokhni Harizadeh. And Rokhni Harizadeh, as I mentioned, is an Iranian artist who has been painting atop of newsreels. So he takes YouTube, he takes the landscape of the internet, and he prints stills from CNN, from Al Jazeera, from Fox News, and he paints atop of them these sort of Kafkaesque, very macabre scenes of either jubilation or commiseration. Some of them take from the Arab Spring, some of them take directly from the Syrian crisis, and so forth, except he replaces human heads with animal heads. So you see this sort of dystopian society going on. And it's really interesting that when I first moved to the US in 2015, I didn't buy a television. I was watching everything on YouTube. I was watching Julian Assange's trial. I was watching all these sort of WikiLeaks, and you had this sort of very ugly neon truth going on. You know, ethics was a huge part of that. And that was something I was, you know, surrounded by within my locality, if you like, in the US, what was going on, what I was watching remotely, what I was thinking about curatorially, and what I was then relaying into the exhibition. So contraband, as I go back to, became this very interesting strategy. What can I smuggle into this collection? What can I say without saying it? And what can I raise value in? So when we think about smuggling, it is always something illicit. How do we remove it from that and bring value into what we don't see, what is sort of hidden? And sort of think about it as a transgressive practice. And within the work of several artists, if we could kindly go back to the very first slide, I'd like to sort of focus on one particular work. Vanessa, could we kindly go to sorry, I beg your pardon, the second slide, not the poster slide, the second one after, with work by Nadia Kabylinki. And I'd like to sort of read a short segment that I had written about this. So I was thinking about smuggling as a sort of metaphor for mapping of origins, and that was used as a tool by several artists within this exhibition. And one such example was to sort of rethink cartographies and histories was a work by Tunisian-born artist Nadia Kavilinki, who's now based in Berlin. And it was sort of about probing the illegal migration that was happening from Africa to Europe following the Arab Spring, where young men were literally smuggled into Europe with a sort of promise of prosperity. And, you know, and what they do end up becoming part of is, unfortunately, the black market economy at the end of the day. And so you have this sort of interpretation of this work that you see here as a geometric structure, almost 20 meters, and it's a geometric structure suspended by rubber threads in the image. And what that actually is entitled is Flying Carpets. And to research this work, the artist spent several days in Venice researching street hawkers who sold their wares on the Central Bridge. And so she'd retraced their steps to create this sort of structure, and it sort of embodied the whole idea of smuggling, but also the sort of idea about geometric consciousness, so coming back to this idea about, you know, removing contraband from its illicit connotation. So what we have here is this, what Holland Cotter called a punishing rain of needles in the New York Times. This is a work very far removed from the United States, but within this context, when you stand underneath it, it becomes an open-air prison. So we start to think about other issues within a more what we understand is local versus global. And that's something I want to keep coming back to when we're thinking about decolonizing, is to sort of dissolve this. And we'll unpack this more in the workshop. So those of you that like to join us, where I'll be speaking a little bit more about this project, as well as Jacqueline's work and Chia-Wei's work as well. And so I know that we're running short of time, so I'd like to just say thank you. And I hope that I've been able to introduce some of the critical themes within my curatorial work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And to all of our panelists, thank you again for your really thoughtful presentations. I just wanted to make a quick note that unfortunately, Joselina Cruz, who was originally invited to moderate, was having some technical difficulties. So I'll be stepping in her stead. I'm hoping that she'll still be able to participate through some questions in the chat. And also just to share a quick note with everyone, because we were running a little bit late for due to the technical problems, we'll extend this panel discussion and Q&A period until 11, and then we'll start the first workshop at 11:05. So I hope that works with everybody's schedule, but we just really wanted to make sure there was enough time for dialogue between the panelists. So, you know, just thinking a bit about all three of your presentations, this idea of context, I think, is really important. I mean, I think definitely, Sarah, you know, since you were the most recent speaker, you know, this idea that you were talking about this local and global dichotomy, and also bringing in this third space now of the digital space. And I think, Jacqueline, with the projects that you were doing, most particularly, I think, with Liu, and tying that into the local issues relating to migrants, and you know, making sure that it resonated, you know, even though it's this artist who is working on very specific cultural thematics, but really making it resonate with the local audience. And with Chia-Wei, with, you know, this idea of the biennial and thinking about a specific place and time that you are really, you know, embodying through the artists that you're picking and the countries that they're coming from. I would be interested to hear a little bit more about how you all look at this idea of how you see it in the others' practices, and how you really want to amplify that, or, you know, how you tend. Becky, do you mind starting? I think, you know, it was really powerful how you were able to make that connection with local audiences, and not even just through the art community, but through universities, and, you know, through the different disciplines that you collaborated with on programming and outreach.
Michelle, sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Did you direct that question to me?
I directed that to Jackie.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear
Yeah,
you.
no, that's
Sorry,
okay.
excuse me.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I
Great.
just earlier, I didn't hear the just the question you posed. I think it cut out for me as well. I was
Oh, I'm
having trouble
sorry.
hearing
I'm
for a
sorry. No, but
moment.
so just to reiterate, Jackie, just thinking particularly with your exhibition with Liu and how,
Mhm.
tying that to the migrant situation and to local communities and not just within the art community, but I think interdisciplinarily, with your collaboration with the college and with these other disciplines, if you could walk us through a little bit about your methodology around that and if that was a successful model that you think that you would like to pursue going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you know, we definitely, I think the series itself was something that I think we've always wanted to do for quite some time at the museum, which was to do a focused exhibition series dedicated to featuring Texas-based Asian women artists. I think there's an incredible, I think that was something that not necessarily has been focused on here just in the Texas region, in North Texas. And it was such a great opportunity to think about all of these just amazing talent that, that do choose to live and be based here. And I think that the model was actually very successful. One element that I did not mention in the presentation too was about even further creating more deeper community ties. We actually, and also ties with our institution that we only recently merged with in 2019. So we actually, students at the university, from studio artists to any kind of discipline, could sign up and actually be part of the installation and be part of helping to install the piece itself. So it was actually very community driven in that way, which was really successful. So I think that, and also working with other departments on the university campus also helped to broaden, I think, the reach and the subject matter more so than I think we may have been able to do just on our own. It was nice to be able to collaborate with other scholars to do a conversation, that was virtual and and could hopefully reach many more people. And I think these like themes of migration, I really appreciated my fellow panelists speak and their presentations too about this important theme of migration. I think we seem to be covering in all of our works right now, in all of the projects we have been doing, because I feel, especially in the United States, like this is there, this is very much a part of, everyone is coming from somewhere else, and ideas and are coming from all different places. So I felt it was personally very satisfying to be able to work with an artist who's, choosing to, be in the United States, but also is able to engage in these kind of very, cross-cultural translations and thinking about migration from very personal, specific lenses.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers the question. I think it was we going forward, we are, continuing this series, and we'll be doing another focus on with another artist, Young Choi, who's Houston based, with also a very unique story of her own, of how she came to the US. So I'm really excited and her work is very autobiographical too, in expressing her migration, her journey as well. So I think those are it's been wonderful.
No, that's fabulous. Thank you so much for the elaboration. And I'm curious maybe to move to Sara then, because the Guggenheim is more of an encyclopedic institution. And so to really, and I know that their focus on Middle East and North Africa is a more recent initiative, relatively to its history. And I just wonder, in terms of that idea of contextualization, how seamless or not was it both to begin infusing the program and the collection with artists from the Middle East and North Africa, both externally with audiences and both and internally with the staff. in terms of kind of, changing the trajectory of the institution's narrative?
Sure. I mean, the museum is modern and contemporary, so less encyclopedic as opposed to the Met.
Well, I mean,
So,
maybe
for example,
geographically, yes.
exactly, yes. So in that respect, it's sort of thematic focus has been 20th century. But it's interesting because when Peggy Guggenheim used to collect a lot of international work, and obviously it wasn't contextualized at that point, but she did have an eye for looking beyond the borders of Europe. But Guggenheim, obviously, when it says it's global, was formed on the idea of looking towards Europe. It wasn't looking towards the global south. It was still within the north, global north, right? So it still had a west-west trajectory. But a number of artists from the 50s and 60s onwards were acquired into the collection from Turkey, from Lebanon, which sort of did dissect through that history as well. And that was also a time when nation states were sort of coming into their own. So there were histories. And with the whole Guggenheim's own history, I was able to sort of delve deep into that. There are, Frank Lloyd Wright is the architect of the Solomon R. Guggenheim on Fifth Avenue. And some of his designs were actually intended for a plan in Baghdad, known as the Plan for Greater Baghdad. It was an artwork also within this exhibition that he was part of this expansion of the city of Baghdad in Iraq, which fell through because the monarchy collapsed. And those plans were years later put into the Solomon R. Guggenheim. So you see this shape of a triangle and oval that's on the exterior of the building, and it runs through from where the towers meet the original architecture. That's a leftover design from Iraq. So there's already transcultural histories embedded within the Guggenheim's physical architecture. And I was able to bring that through the work of Ala Yunus into my exhibition. So they were there, but they were not the obvious sort of elements. So there was that, again, the smuggling element, the contraband had to sort of be used as an unearthing tool to sort of think about what resides. And it was interesting because that's part of the legacy of the Guggenheim. If its building is a leftover design from Iraq, or it incorporates leftover design from another spatial topography, another geography, it's already there. It just needed to be maybe more presented in a more coherent way, in which it then becomes part of the history, not the Eurocentric version of the history, but all-encompassing history. It's always there. And I think with other collections or other institutions or curatorial projects, it's a selective idea to dismiss certain global paradigms, to not think of them. It's amnesia. I'm not saying that I'm being nostalgic. I'm trying to be progressive about it, but it's to do with the subjectivities rather.
Yes, no, I agree. And I think, Chia-Wei, in your presentation, thinking about these hybridities, I think in particular, the work that you were talking about by Ming Wong, thinking about histories and bringing in, from Bruce Lee, who is, born in Hong Kong, but became this icon in America, and kind of this not only of martial arts and power, but also of, what people identify as an Asian American man on one end, but I think there's also the emasculation of Asian American men. It's a whole other subject, but just thinking about those kinds of hybridities, and it really reminded me of what Professor Spivak was saying about how, then it becomes this much more dynamic and holistic perspective, and this idea of, you're using this very traditional Chinese kind of landscape and water, mountains and waters dichotomy with Chinese painting, but then, commingling it with like Bitcoin mining and just like this kind of very timely and social, socioeconomic political dichotomies, which interestingly enough, I mean, the literati painters also infuse that very subtly through their landscape painting. So I'm very interested in kind of how you were thinking about this axis of, sea and mountain, and kind of using that as a map for your curatorial practice and for the biennial specifically. And for those that in the audience, Chia-Wei just consulted with his
Yeah.
translator, so that's why the pause.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I will need translator to help me to answer this question. So
No, of course. Please take your time. Thank you.
就是第一个就是说，因为我自己是艺术家哦，所以我在策划这展览的时候呢，我想的是怎么把这个展览的概念呢，当做一个平台，是一个艺术家可以在里面实践的平台。一边讲。
Okay, so because Chia-Wei is an artist, so when he was curating the biennial, he was thinking about the exhibition as a platform.
要大声一点。
Oh, can you come a little closer to the
要
mic?
大声一点。
Oh, sorry. Thank
Sorry,
you so much. No, that's fine. That's much better. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so Chia-Wei is an artist. So when he was thinking about the curatorial discourse, he was thinking about the exhibition as a platform for artists.
所以呢，就是我的这个展览呢，我比较把艺术家当作是一个行动者，他们好像在第一线在那里做创作嘛，所以我会在意他们行动的部分，所以这个展览呢比较像是一个第一线的生产，所以跟其他在美术馆的一些展览可能有点茶有教育推广可能会不太一样这样。
So when he was thinking about the artists, he sees them as activists mostly, and that they're at the front line of where all the action is. And so it's the way that he thinks about artists and their artworks is a little bit different from how museums think about their collection and so on, and education. Yeah.
那我刚刚讲的那个展览的概念啊，就两个轴线嘛，就是第一个。我们可以看到那个框跟云端哦，那其实是来自于我之前有策划另一个展，是有关数位的这个概念哦。然后我们今天呢，其实我们今天已经是整个生活中其实是各式各样的数位城市，然后我们也因为这些数位的技术，所以让我们开始可以，比如说我们可以感测到地质，我们可以感受到肚子里的微生，我们可以感受到外太空，所以其实透过这也开启一种非人的视野。
So when he was thinking about, like, for example, the mineral and the cloud access, because for another exhibition, he also talked about, he was dealing with topics such as digital technology and how it's in our lives, in our everyday lives. And so when he was thinking about this exhibition, he was thinking about how technology is part of our everyday lives, and then also how it also enables us to think about other themes. For example, our technology today allows us to probe into the minerals in the earth, and then also like microscopic bacteria, and then also we can look as far as outer space. So with modern technology, we are also able to further stretch our imagination from just human beings to the non-humans.
所以就是我们就在想，如果用这样的背景哦，我们如果重新再来看这些过去讨论的这些东南亚的历史啊，或是殖民问题，可能可以有什么新的角度，所以我们才会有这个山跟海还有云跟矿这两个轴线的穿插。然后我再补充一点，就是说其实minh旺的作品的最后一段它很有趣，就是他讲到了这个外太空，就是他做了一个太空的歌剧，然后有讲到这个太空人上外太空这件事情。那他其实一开始原本在讲这个红船啊，就是在海岸对抗帝国嘛，逃离帝国。可是慢慢他把作品语境转成是逃离地球。然后很巧的，在流窗的作品最后一段也是跟外星有关。他在讲说，我们对这些外星人的形象，其实是来自于我们想象我们在地球上的这一些少数民族，我们是用这样的方法来想象。所以你先讲吧。
Okay. So for like for example, in Southeast Asia, he thinks that these new technologies, they enable us to think about colonialism from like a different perspective, from a non-human perspective. And then talking about the mountain and sea axis, he just wants to further talk about Ming Wang's work, which is very interesting because he talks about later on in his work, he talks about outer space, and then also a Peking opera that takes place in outer space. So, so these people originally in China, they were escaping the persecution of the empire. But for people today, we are now sort of like in a state where we're trying to escape from Earth. And then he also talks about that there is a very that coincidentally Liu Zhang's work also in the second half of his work, he talks about aliens also and about outer space. He moves the focus to outer space. And then actually in a lot of science fiction movies and films, and also in his work, alien civilizations were actually just based on ethnic minorities.
那最后一个补充就是说，
No, that's
过去我们都会讲这个在地跟全球这样俄语的关系嘛，然后背后就跟全球化议题有关。可是今天有很多例子，就让我们去想到，也许今天不是讨论全球，而是讨论星球。对，那用这样的角度，原本很多的问题，我们可能都会有不同的角度来看。对。
Okay. So in the end, he just wants to add that in the past, perhaps there is a dichotomy between the local and globalization, but now today, because of modern technology and because of different things that are happening right now, for example, to the environment, now we can perhaps like shift the perspective to outer space or to a larger framework, and thus, shifting the perspective.
No, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And I think that segues very well into a question from our moderator, Joselina Cruz, who I'm happy to be her interpreter in absentia. But her question is, due to the various but also shifting contexts of the spaces where we as curators operate, whether it's thinkers, directors, artists, writers, or even bureaucrats, to whom are these decolonizing strategies addressed to? And does your work speak to the very institutions which are the spaces that these works are entrenched in, the artists or the audience? So maybe we could talk about that a little bit as well, especially as we've all been talking about this third digital space. Who are we projecting our ideals and our messages to, and who's receiving that, and how are they receiving that in kind of the infinite space of the ether? Maybe Jackie, would you mind starting off?
Okay, I unmuted. Yes, I think I'm thinking about like this question about the audience, and also the institution, our institution itself. Our institution also has a permanent collection as a museum dedicated to the arts of Asia. It also has a permanent collection that of actually from multinational, actually Japan and all East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, represented in the collection from varying time periods. And so I think I do think about often not only trying to draw out themes from the collections itself, but I'm also thinking, I think it's very important to absolutely work with contemporary artists and include them as part of the dialogue in our space. One of the challenges with our museum is the architecture itself. I think that also provides an opportunity. So we are the way our museum building is designed also is that it requires, oftentimes in order to navigate through the building, you kind of are forced to go through galleries, like from one gallery to get to another, And I'm very cognizant of that and thinking about the visitor's experience and the visitor's journey. But that also plays into the possibilities of that crossing conversations, where you're navigating between a historical exhibition and then moving into a contemporary display. And so I think that's actually quite unique about what we can do in that kind of architecture. And I'm hoping that it connects, like perhaps not, it's hopefully picking up for the viewers that they can connect and think about, themes of the past, but also themes of the present, or perhaps how themes in the past connect to themes of the present, and really just enhancing the relevancy. And I bring that up because there was a follow-up question I see in the chat about what are the possible linkages that I see between the temporary exhibitions of API artists and the more historical Asian art collection. And I think that it's very important in our space if we're dedicated to talking to the arts and cultures of Asia and featuring the arts and cultures of Asia. You can't not bring relevancy to current practices that are happening now. And also importantly, that the importance of not necessarily gallery designations. That's the other thing that we are doing in our spaces, is that it's actually, some spaces work better for certain works and such, but other than that, I think it's so great that that same space can be transformed, from a historical show to, or mixture of pieces or media in the same space that was once for something else. So I think that this is incredibly important for sort of resonating with our communities out here, like our actual visitors. So I absolutely think it's hopefully crossing dialogues, helping to form new connections, hoping to form new meanings from what people are seeing.
No, definitely. And I think having that continuum, because, nothing is made in a vacuum. So to be showing kind of the connections chronologically and regionally and, spatially, but, materiality related to that. So I think that's really important and compelling. And Sarah, I know in your presentation, you were really stressing ethics and truth. And so, thinking about these decolonizing strategies, and trying to be true and to stick to ethics. Whose truth should we be prefacing over others? And what is, how are you defining truth in that way, and through your work in the context of Joselina's question?
Well, it's an interesting question. What I think about artist practices, what they allow us are myriad ways to think about what constitutes as the real, what is real. So they're giving us, maybe, let's just take an exhibition as an example, 18 perspectives into what constitutes as real. So truth is really logic, a way in which to sort of rethink ideas through a logical paradigm, or a lens rather. And that's how I sort of approach it within my work. When we think about ethics in its most, simplistic idea, we think about wrong and right. And therefore, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 18 months or so, we have sort of seen a reckoning, or, a sort of ethical turn, if you like. That's a really sort of rethinking the way in which we curate and the way we build collections and the way we run our museums. So sort of to bring that back, it's something that is going through a shift. It's, looking at both indigenous ideas of what is truth or what is logic, but also thinking it through that digital sort of space. Your earlier question, you asked about the digital. It's really interesting because the digital has the capacity to create viral materials. So any cultural, intellectual material can go viral via the digital space. And that has both positive implications as well as possibly harmful implications through the misconstruing of ideas, cancel culture. So people who might perceive themselves as being ethical are actually part of a harmful practice at the same time. So, it's a very complex issue that requires, unpacking, which is why it was so important that you started this conference with Gayatri Spivak's keynote, because ideas don't fall out the sky. This philosophical tradition and how we receive ideas, it's an evolution. It's going from global south to global north. It's coming from continental Europe. It's coming to the United States, and so forth. And that is really important to sort of embrace that and acknowledge that. She said something very interesting. She spoke about the finger pointing, which is something that is, cancel culture is a form of finger pointing at somebody, or this sort of you are wrong and we are right, this kind of very polarizing conversation is extremely dangerous. She called it it's extremely dangerous because it doesn't allow for any nuances. It doesn't allow for any conversation to take place. And often when I think about Asia or Asian American, I mean, I'm Asian because I'm Persian and Central Asian, but I'm not Asian how it's recognized in the United States. And so there are all these sort of in the polarizing discourse, there is a majority that is completely ignored, removed from that dialogue as well. So there are all these things to think about. We're all trying to sort of achieve the same goal, which is visibility, which is equity, which is representation. But it seems to be that within a polarizing conversation, that can never be fully achieved.
And I do think there is a danger in then further ghettoizing certain communities in the kind of attempt to, give them a platform, because then it's again further isolating. So I think it is a really delicate balance. I really agree with you on that. And, also you don't want to alienate other audiences because, as we see in the more political realm in the United States, people are becoming more entrenched in their own bubbles and in their own ideologies. And there are those who were formerly in the majority and will probably, I think by 2032, then the Caucasian community will be the minority in the United States, but who feel, threatened and that they are being disenfranchised in a way that, in the same way. And so how do you kind of balance it so nobody feels alienated and that you don't want to turn away those who you're trying to connect with and to see these, broader experiences and to acknowledge, marginalized identities. So I think it's our responsibility to not only champion those who have been formerly marginalized, but make sure that we leave room at the table for everybody to participate and not feel that they are excluded by default. So
absolutely. And you're so right in saying that. And obviously, Professor Spivak spoke about that, this sort of decentralized model, because, decentralized means that it's, spread in a way that's both vertical and horizontal. It's no longer centralized. So the knowledge systems or, a certain minority, they might become the minority, a certain group, yet the power will still reside within that minority's hands. So it is really to do with capital. And obviously, you touched upon that, Choi, in your presentation as well, when you spoke about different forms of capital as well. There's cultural capital and then there's monetary capital. So there are all these things. And our work is cultural capital. We are trying to, raise value through culture. But capital is still so much tied to monetary systems. And obviously capitalism comes from that. So there are all these sort of ideas to unpack. And it's a hard work, but someone's got to do it, right? So I guess we're sort of thinking in terms of, not putting too much pressure on artists to sort of solve all the problems of society, but then we use their language, the visual language, to highlight and to illustrate some of these points.
Yes. And Chia-Wei, maybe that's a good segue for you to share some thoughts. As an artist, how do you feel your responsibility? I think artists sometimes have a lot more freedom than, curators or those who are ensconced in an institution that has policies and that has to kind of toe certain rules. Artists are really free and liberated to do, as they would like, through their work. And so maybe if you could share a little bit of insights from your perspective.
解殖民的这个概念的话，我觉得有一个很重要的，还是不管是说有关于解殖民哪一个特定的议题，我觉得很重要的还是有关如何打破既定的意识形态框架这个问题。那我觉得今天的艺术家刚好有一个产生一个有趣的状况，就是说今天的艺术家，因为我们今天当代技术，比如说网际网络啊等等的，让我们很容易能够自己手边就能够拿到各式各样的材料啊资料，能够自学。所以艺术家今天很可能可以是一个各个不同领域的业余者。那这样的一个角色呢，他就刚好可以让不同领域原本所属不同领域的这一些内容呢，可能是透过业余者这种角色让他放在一起，他可能会去碰撞或产生新的意义。那有时候就是光是这种打破原本不同的领域比，它可能就会产生新的意义，它可能就会打破既有的意识形态框架。
Okay. So about the issue of decolonization, for him, because perhaps artists, they can, through their practices, they can help break the existing ideologies. For example, he mentions that because nowadays modern technology is very advanced, and a lot of people, they can go online and just learn everything as amateurs. So for artists, it could be a possibility that a lot of artists, they go online and then they do research due to modern technology today. So they're probably not professional biologists, or they're not environmentalist professionals, but they're amateurs. But because they're amateurs, they can actually perhaps push interdisciplinary dialogues. And through these interdisciplinary dialogues, he thinks that artists are able to break the existing ideologies, and then also perhaps form new meanings between these different fields.
另外一点就是说，因为艺术家自己也是观众啊，艺术家是一个行动者，艺术家他去不同的地方跟不同的人事物工作，他就像是代替美术馆的观众去做了这些事情。所以我觉得这个是就艺术家这个层面怎么思考观众这件事情，就是艺术家代替了原本这一家美术馆的观众，去了一个他们所未知的地方。
And then also for him, he thinks that artists, they're not only at the front line of the action, they can also be the viewers, the audiences. So in embodying like these different roles, they can be like in a different role, different from museums or art museums, and then also be able to bring other topics into the dialogue.
No, I think that's very true. And Choi, we thank you in your role as an artist to inspire the rest of us to, really championing your voice and your colleagues, and using that, using our institutions as a platform to really engage and to bring greater, coming together between disparate peoples. I don't know if anybody has any last words to share before we close. Sarah, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share? Or Jackie? No? All right. Well, I would like to thank you all for your generosity of time and expertise. This concludes our first panel of the summit.